All right, everybody, welcome in to the show. And obviously, the breaking news that happened this morning, and the thing that I said that was going to happen for the last 2 months has happened. George Pickens has been traded from the Steelers to the Cowboys. The Steelers are receiving a 2026 third round pick and a 2026 fifth round pick. In exchange for Pickens, they're also sending a 6th-round pick to the Cowboys for Pickens. And I would love to be humble about this, but I'm not going to be. Because for the last, not even like the last couple months, I mean, really over the last, dating back to October, I've said, yeah, Pickens probably not going to be a Steeler for much longer. And everybody and their mother, whether it be on here, whether it be on Twitter, constantly telling me, oh, they're not going to trade George Pickens. And I just sat back, all right, whatever you say. Especially 2 weeks ago during the draft when I said, oh, looks like they're going to trade Pickens. And then so many people saying, no, they're not going to do it. Why would they trade George Pickens? And I said, okay, whatever you all say. And then lo and behold, they move Pickens. And it makes perfect sense to do it. I know a lot of people are going to be bummed about it because, they just traded for DK Metcalf. And a lot of people were like, oh, okay, 2 good receivers. But as I said, once the trade happened, they're the exact same receiver. If you look at their numbers, over the especially last year, they do the exact same thing. They're both really good deep threats, really good, I shouldn't say number 2. They're really good at what they do, which is being field stretchers, deep ball receivers, and getting you big yards. None of them have a really refined route tree. None of them are, revered route runners. And so having 2 guys that do that, felt redundant. And as soon as they traded for DK Metcalf, they gave him a 4-year extension worth a ton of money. The writing was on the wall then. They weren't going to pay both George and DK Metcalf. However, if George wasn't such a constant pain in the ass, maybe they would have considered paying both of them. But them doing it now tells you everything that you need to know about how they feel. They're tired of dealing with the constant headache, tired of dealing with the consistent on-field nonsense that comes with him. And so they felt DK was better. They got DK. They trade George. And now they have to turn their attention to getting a number 2, which, was the situation they were in last year. But at least this year, we know that Calvin Austin can play. So that's good. They signed Robert Woods, who, a fine veteran. So they're in a better situation than they were last year in terms of the pass catchers. And whenever Aaron Rodgers decides to get here, they'll be in a better position at the quarterback position. But this is a trade that has been brewing and really, dating back to last year whenever it looked like he was in the doghouse against Dallas. And ever since then, it was like, okay, things feel like they could be falling off here. And then they trade for DK Metcalf, and that was the writing on the wall. Now, I understand a lot of people rightful frustrations that they didn't draft a receiver. I feel the same way. And I said it during the draft. In the 4th round, they took Jack Sawyer when Elick Aomanor was available. And he would have been a receiver who perfectly fit into what Arthur Smith does offensively. So if they're going to trade Pickens, it makes no sense why they didn't draft a receiver. And that's a very fair criticism to have. And so now they got to turn their attention to, if they want to bring in Keenan Allen, who even at his, I think he's 32 now, even at his age was still really productive last year with the Bears, had 70 catches and 7 touchdowns. If they want to sign Amari Cooper to a cheap 1-year deal, wasn't as productive as he's been in previous years last year when he got traded to Buffalo. Dealt with some injuries for a few weeks, but even so, wasn't that big acquisition that they were expecting him to be. but would be a fine 1-year stopgap. Or they could go the route of, hey, the Packers just drafted 2 receivers and they already had a ton. So if they want to call Green Bay about Romeo Doubs, I think that's something that they'll do. If they want to call them about Dontavian Wicks, potentially like Malik Heath, but Malik Heath is like a fourth or third receiver. That feels kind of like a redundant move. So I think John Mechie from Houston would be somebody that makes sense because the Texans just drafted 2 more receivers. So there's guys out there that they can go get. If they want to call the Raiders about Jacoby Myers, I don't know if the Raiders would do that, considering that Jacoby Myers is, one of the few receivers they have. They did just draft Jack Betch from TCU, and they do have Trey Tucker, but I don't know if they would be a team that would move on from Jacoby Myers or not. The extreme would be if they trade for like Tyreek Hill. I don't think they're going to do that. You don't move on from George Pickens and then trade for Tyreek Hill. That doesn't make sense. However, if Garrett Wilson doesn't want to be in New York, maybe they can circle back to that. But, his old college quarterback, Justin Fields, is there. So I don't think that he'll want out. But maybe, you go to Indianapolis. Could you get Michael Pittman? If they can do that, I mean, that's a hell of a pickup after trading Pickens if you can get Michael Pittman. There's plenty of names that they can pursue or at least ask about. See if the 49ers are still interested in trading Ayuk. Wouldn't that be the most hilarious outcome of this? Last year when we spent all offseason talking about Brandon Ayuk potentially coming to Pittsburgh, if a year later him and DK Metcalf were both Steelers. It's like, I understand that people are annoyed at the timing of it, maybe, because they didn't draft a receiver, which they could very well have done. And that's a fair criticism. But in terms of the people who are saying that it doesn't make sense to do it in general, that frankly, it's incorrect. Because now, going into the 2026 draft, they're going to have 5 picks spread across the first 2 days. And what they're gearing up to do. Like, they're going to move up for a quarterback. And now they have the ammunition to do it, especially because we saw what Cleveland did in the draft, where they have 2 first-round picks now after trading with Jacksonville. The Rams have 2 first-round picks now if they wanted to find the successor to Matthew Stafford next year. The Steelers needed ammunition. And with the third-round pick comp pick that they're projected to get for Dan Moore, their own third-round pick, and now the third-round pick they have from Dallas, they're going to have 3 third-round picks next year that they can use to move up once or twice if need be. Because God knows they're probably not going to finish in the top 10. They never do. They'll finish somewhere between 18 and 21, and they'll do what the Bills did when they got Josh Allen. They'll move up from, say, 19 to 12, and then 12 into the top 10. And if that ends up getting them Drew Aller, Lenora Sellers, Garrett Nussmeier, whatever quarterback of the 2026 class that they really love, then yeah, this is absolutely worth it. And look, even if that guy stinks, it was worth doing to at least take a dart throw. Because he can't just sit idle forever at the position. They had to do something. They weren't going to pay Pickens anyway. They weren't going to extend him. And everybody's like, oh, well, why didn't they just wait to get a comp pick for him? Okay, well, a 2027 comp pick doesn't help them next year. And there's a bunch of people, too, who are like, yeah, 2025 probably going to be a gap year. Why are you pissed that they traded Pickens then? Like, if we're acknowledging, yeah, probably not going to do much this year. Maybe they'll win a playoff game with Rodgers. That'd be cool. But this isn't a Super Bowl team. But why are you pissed? If we have realistic expectations, then this shouldn't irritate people. This is, in the grand scheme of things, this is a very good move. Anybody who said, oh, they need to get a second-round pick for him, that was never going to happen. DK went for a second-round pick. He's better than Pickens, and he comes with less of a headache. I know that DK had, a little situation last year, and he's had a few in the past, but I think overall he's a little bit more buttoned up than George is. And they feel like he's better. And there's no way in hell they were going to keep both those guys in the same locker room. So this is a good move. For the long-term future of getting a quarterback next year, this is a move that makes sense. They weren't going to pay George. And so this is a move that makes sense. And now I'm just waiting for everybody who 2 weeks ago said that they weren't going to trade Pickens to appear in the comments. Robert says, what the fuck did I just wake up to? What is Khan doing? I just told you what Khan's doing, bub. He's gearing up to get a quarterback next year. Weren't going to pay George. Get something for him to use as ammunition to move up for a quarterback. And again, whether it's Aller, whether it's Sellers, whether it's Nussmeier, whatever one they love, they are more than likely, almost certainly not going to be in position to just take him straight up. They're going to be a team that wins at least 8-9 games. They're going to be a middle of the pack team. They got to get ammunition to move up for a quarterback, and they might have to trade up twice. So having 5 picks over the first 2 days in the draft, that's pretty good ammunition to do that. Robert adds, I'm fully convinced the Steelers are secretly tanking. No, because if they were tanking, then they wouldn't be, pursuing Aaron Rodgers. If they were tanking, none of that would have ever taken place. They would have just stuck with Mason and rode it out for this year. And even so, like, Mason has proven that he can win. At least or that the Steelers can win with Mason. So even then, like, they would have to put me under center to really be like, oh, okay, yeah, now they're officially tanking. So, and if they were tanking, then they would trade Cam Hayward. They would trade TJ, which, by the way, I think they should do anyway. You shouldn't love TJ. No reason to give that guy $40 million a year right now. At this stage of his career, no. But if they were like really tanking, they would be moving on from people besides a diva wide receiver. Joey says, I'm just more upset because we didn't draft a receiver because last year we saw what happened. That's a fair criticism. Extremely fair criticism. And I was vocally annoyed that they didn't take a receiver as well because Elick Ayomanor was available in the 4th round and they took Jack Sawyer. Jack Sawyer seems like a great dude. Hopefully eventually turns into a good edge rusher at this level and becomes, a nice part of the rotation. But like right now, man, like that doesn't help them. So I get that. I completely get that point of view, and I think it's a very justified one to have. Donnie says, this would have made more sense had they drafted a receiver. No, I hear you. And that is the criticism that I will certainly be giving them, is that if they were going to try to trade Pickens, or if they knew that they were going to trade Pickens, then you should have taken a receiver at some point. And they didn't. And so that's, again, fair criticism and very annoying. I'm not going to argue that because I agree. I don't know why they did it that way. It's similar to what they did last year, really, when they traded Deontay and didn't have anybody ready on hand to replace him. And I think that they overestimated like how available certain receivers were going to be. Again, they reached out about Cortland Sutton. Denver said no. They reached out about DK last year and Seattle said no. So like, I don't want to see them make that same mistake. Hopefully they are pretty proactive about it and go get a guy immediately. That way we don't spend all this time speculating about who the second receiver is going to be. Robert says, now we're back to no wide receiver too. Yeah, and look, it's a pain in the butt for the time being, for sure. But like I said at the start of the show, at least we know Calvin Austin can play a little bit. He really proved his worth last year. So I think not having the uncertainty surrounding Calvin Austin is an upgrade from where they were last year when we didn't know what he was going to look like. We haven't really talked a lot about Roman Wilson on this show throughout, this year, because I just don't think Roman Wilson's going to be very good. But I said that about Calvin Austin last year, and Calvin Austin turned out to be pretty productive. So maybe if I say it again, Roman Wilson will do something this year. But like, I mean, that's a guy that they took in the 3rd round last year and, was hurt for a little bit. But after a while, it was clear, okay, they're going to keep saying he's hurt when in reality, they just don't feel comfortable putting him on the field. A sprained ankle doesn't last 18 weeks, So, that's a guy who, was definitely hurt during camp. But after a while, he wasn't on the field because they didn't feel comfortable putting him on the field. And that's a problem for a 3rd round receiver. So we'll see with him. Like I said, I don't see him turning into, a difference maker in the offense. But again, I said that about Calvin Austin. He had a really nice year last year. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. We'll see with Roman what comes of that. But I think when it comes to the second receiver, they'll either pursue another trade because there's guys that they can go and get. They can call Green Bay, who just drafted 2 receivers, and try to get Romeo Doubs. They can call Houston and try to get John Mechie. They can call Indianapolis about Michael Pittman. They can circle back to the 49ers and say, hey, would you still trade Ayuk? And look, if they can get Brandon Ayuk for, a 4th-round pick, he's coming off an ACL, I think that hurts his value a little bit. Then sure, I'd be open for that. Even if they have to use one of the thirds, yeah, that's fine. I get that. I would much rather you just save that for, the draft next year rather than risk it. But like, there's guys that they can go and get. John says Steelers had a 2.8% chance to win the Super Bowl with George Pickens. His loss won't move the needle much. And that's the thing, man. Like, this was never going to be a year that the Steelers are going to make a run for the Super Bowl. As much as like they want to tell themselves that, internally, like my guess is that their goal for this year is let's just win a playoff game and end this drought so people like can stop saying we haven't won a playoff game in almost a decade. And look, in the AFC, you can do that. Like, the AFC is far more top-heavy team-wise. They're much better quarterback-wise, but team-wise, it's very top-heavy. It's the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. Like Cincinnati, Joe Burrow's great, but they just missed the playoffs again last year. Look elsewhere. Like, the Texans are beatable. I know that they've won a playoff game for the past couple years, but their offensive line's horrible. Like, every AFC South team is beatable. Every AFC East team outside of the Bills, like, none of them scare you too much. I think the Patriots will be better and they might be a playoff team this year, but like that's not like a Super Bowl threat. I think there's right now 3, maybe 4 Super Bowl threats in the AFC. Outside of that, you can beat teams. You can beat teams like Houston. You can beat the Chargers. You can beat, just about every other team outside of that. They weren't going to beat the Chiefs with George. They weren't going to beat the Bills with George. They weren't going to beat Baltimore with George, So, no, this doesn't bother me. Less appealing for Rodgers. Rodgers is coming. Like, it's all but in stone that he's going to be a Steeler. Art Rooney has said as much as like, yeah, we expect him to be here. Like, it'll be Rodgers. It'll just be on his time, which again, bending the knee to Aaron Rodgers, yeah, that does annoy me. Oh, well, would you look at that? You know what? I bet. So the Jaguars, this is just in from Adam Shepard, just released Gabe Davis, the former Buffalo Bill. I would bet money the Steelers sign him. There you go. There's your new number 2. They can sign Gabe Davis for super cheap. There's your Pickens replacement. He is already George Pickens. Field stretcher. By the way, not for nothing, Gabe Davis blocks his ass off. Like, I like Gabe Davis. And I think that he fits what Arthur Smith wants to do. Blocks his butt off. Can be like the big underneath guy, but also be a field stretcher. So, like, again, it would be somewhat redundant because him and DK, like, DK does it to a much better degree, but him and DK Metcalf, very similar receivers. Like, Gabe Davis isn't a route technician. He's not known for his route tree. He's a vertical threat who blocks. But vertical threat who blocks, that's kind of Arthur Smith's MO when it comes to receivers. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up there. But I would bet good money that they at least look at Gabe Davis. I would not be shocked at all if Gabe Davis ends up being a Steeler. And again, Gabe Davis made a lot of money from one game against the Chiefs. where he had 4 touchdowns in the playoffs, the 13 seconds game. And he wasn't worth the money that Jacksonville gave him, and Buffalo was willing to let him go because they knew, okay, Gabe Davis just isn't moving the needle here. But again, as a stopgap guy that you can get for super cheap, yeah, whatever, that's fine. You can sign Gabe Davis to a cheap 1 or 2 year deal. I can live with that. Again, fits what Arthur Smith wants to do. They're going to run the ball. Gabe Davis is a damn good blocking receiver. Say what you want about Gabe Davis, but, he is good at that. So I wouldn't be shocked if they signed Gabe Davis. They should have taken Brian Thomas Jr. last year, but I think I think Troy will be good, though. Yeah, like, hindsight being 2020, I would have loved that, too. Especially with how good Brian Thomas has been in Jacksonville. I would like Romeo if we could land him. Yeah, I mean, Romeo Doubs would be a good pickup, and they could get him for... They could probably send, I don't know, the 6th round pick they just got from Dallas. I'm sorry, no. The 5th round pick they just got from Dallas and get Romeo Doubs. I bet that they could do that. Like, Romeo Doubs is a solid receiver, but he's not at the level of getting, a 3rd round pick in return for him like a Pickens is. If it costs him a 4th, that's fine. Like, who are you going to draft in the 4th round next year that's going to be, quite as good as Doubs? Probably no one. Marjo, so why draft an edge in the 1st round instead of a receiver? I agree. They should have drafted Eli Gaymanor there. I said that after they did it. They took Jack Sawyer. I said Eli Gaymanor's right there. He fits everything that you want in a receiver, that especially Pittsburgh, like Arthur Smith wise. Like that is an Arthur Smith receiver. Don't worry, Marjo, though. I remember you telling me that they weren't going to trade George Pickens. I remember. But yes, I 100% agree. They should have taken a receiver in the 4th. I would have taken Eli Gaymanor. Taking Jack Sawyer there feels a bit weird. First, I was mad about hearing this from you. It makes me feel a lot better. Like you said, we aren't going to go into the Super Bowl or beating those powerhouse teams. Yeah. They're still in a similar boat than they were when they had Pickens, And look, I'll say this too. Like, Brandon Beane, the GM of the Bills, has gone like scorched earth over the last couple of weeks talking about receivers and whatnot, and people bitching and moaning about them not getting a receiver. And obviously it's comparing apples to oranges because the Steelers don't have Josh Allen. But for what the Steelers want to do, for what Arthur Smith wants to do, like the Titans got to the AFC title game only having one like great receiver. Obviously they had Derrick Henry. But if the Steelers run game can be dominant, then I think that's what Smith wants to do, is just try to recreate the 2019 Titans as much as he can. And he's going to try to do that with Caleb Johnson and Jalen Warren in the run game. DK Metcalf is basically going to be his A.J. Brown. And now we'll see who ends up being the number 2. But again, if you can go and get a Gabe Davis, who is the Aldi, something smaller than Aldi, the Kroger's probably bigger. The great value version of George Pickens blocks better than George Pickens does. Not nearly as good as a receiving threat, though, as George Pickens. He's a good vertical threat. Gabe Davis will have one game a year where he'll go for like 6 catches, $140 and 2 touchdowns. And for 3 games after that, he'll go 0 catches, 1 catch, 1 catch. He's an anomaly of a receiver. But I would bet that would be somebody that they inquire about. I think Rodgers' drama, real or media made up, will get cash for engagement time, but will hurt the team's reputation. I mean, look, man, say what you want about Aaron and like that he annoys you or you find all this stuff to be annoying. For all intents and purposes, like, there's not too many teammates of his that have ever like publicly bashed him or anything like that. I mean, he's on McAfee all the time talking to one of his former teammates who obviously has a lot of love for him. All his receivers like seem to. Greg Jennings is the one who's always like publicly dunking on Aaron Rodgers for whatever reason. But like there isn't a large collection of teammates that don't like Aaron, or at least like don't say it publicly if they don't like Aaron Rodgers. So I think a lot of the annoyance is more from the fans than it is from like the locker room internally. Taking wide receiver would have given them less leverage for a trade. Taking one would have showed their planned desire to trade for George Pickens. That's a good point, I guess. But even so, like, if you're a team who wants George Pickens, you're not going to just all of a sudden not trade for him just because the Steelers took a receiver, you know? I understand, the whole leverage thing, but even so, like, they should have been more prepared for it. But my thoughts on it are that this year was never going to matter anyway. At best case scenario, they would win a wild card game, and that's great. That was the best case scenario for them last year, in my opinion. Is that okay? Maybe you win a wild card game. That's cool. But that's the ceiling with this team, is maybe they'll win a wild card game. So, I'm not. That's why I wasn't, floored by it like so many other fans were. That's why I've said it was going to happen for the last 2 months. So, yeah, I'm not bothered by it whatsoever, and I do wish that they would have taken a receiver though. Aaron wake up and said they gave away one of my weapons. I promise you, it was probably for the better in Aaron's eyes. You think Aaron wants to deal with George Pickens? I don't. I think he's going to be happy with DK Metcalf. They'll probably bring in Alan Lazard to make him happy. Which, by the way, I mean, Alan Lazard, that's fine. That's whatever. Like, Alan Lazard doesn't suck, but he's not great. What did Alan Lazard do last year? Let's take a look at Alan Lazard's numbers for funsies. Alan Lazard. Yeah, 6 touchdowns last year, 37 catches. That is perfect production for like a wide receiver 2 in this offense. More like a wide receiver 3 that you want, but with the Steelers, man, like I said, they're going to be a run-first team that heavily targets DK, Pat Freiermuth, and then, you sprinkle in some Alan Lazard and Calvin Austin, Robert Woods. Like, you can make that work. It's still a better receiving core than what they had last year. And if Russell Wilson can make stuff work with Van Jefferson, I think that Aaron Rodgers can make stuff work with Calvin Austin and Robert Woods. And by the way, those are the type of guys that Aaron likes. Aaron likes a more veteran receiver, which is why I think going out and getting like a Keenan Allen makes so much sense. Because Aaron likes the older guys who have been there, done that, and know what they're doing, rather than having to deal with, the prototypical diva wide receiver. It's why Randall Cobb was his guy for so long. And that's why Devontae, despite, all the trade stuff, like Devontae's never been like a diva. So I think that this is better for Aaron, if anything, not having to deal with the headache that comes with George Pickens. So we'll see what comes of it. But this doesn't surprise me in the slightest. It's something that I've said I think is going to happen since they traded for DK Metcalf and then immediately extended him. And from the Steelers' perspective now, it just comes down to, okay, who are they going to get to replenish that role? When are they going to, get this person? We'll see. There's plenty of names that they can pursue. Plenty of names that they likely will pursue. I think Gabe Davis is going to be one of those names. Especially now that he's a free agent, they don't got to give up anything for him. He's not going to be expensive. Just for fun, let me see what Gabe Davis' stats were last year. I bet that they were better than Alan Lazard's. I might have been wrong. Yeah, he only played in 10 games last year. Oh, yeah, not a great year for Gabe Davis last year. Yeah, 20 catches for 239 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's like the exact same numbers that Robert Woods had. But yeah, 2023 with the Bills, 45 catches, 746 yards, 7 touchdowns, consistently averages over 15 yards a catch. Like, that's what he does. He's a deep threat who'll give you a couple catches a game and a run block. That is the Gabe Davis MO. So that's a name to watch. If they want to make a trade for somebody, Michael Pittman would be the dream at this point. Ayuk would be cool, but he's coming off an ACL, and I don't know what that would look like. Who else? John Mechie, Romeo Dobbs, the other names that we talked about. I think that those are all possibilities. We'll talk about it more as time goes on here. But yeah, the Steelers trade George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys. I'm excited to see what that offense will look like. I mean, Dak's a good quarterback. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. I'm excited to see what George is going to do the first time that CeeDee gets like 17 targets to his 4. I'm sure that he'll take that very well. So there's still an entire offseason for them to, decide what they want to do. Hopefully they don't wait that long. Hopefully, before mandatory minicamp, they have that other guy there rather than dragging this thing out and having to, keep us all in the dark. But I fully expect them to add somebody. And we'll see what happens in due time. But if you're watching and you're not already subscribed to the channel, please be sure to do that. And we'll be back very soon to talk more about what the Steelers are going to do at receiver. And throughout the rest of the offseason to, just talk about everything Steelers related on Black and Gold Breakdown. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want just more national stuff, the latest episode of the Pump Fake is on the channel now. Me and Mike Tanier rank all 8 division losers last year from the least chance to greatest chance to go from worst to first in 2025. You can also listen to that wherever you get your podcast. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, do all that fun stuff. Talk to you guys soon. Have a good day. Thank you so much for watching.